It's not a real job, Sarah. It's a scam. The words hung in the air, thick and cloying like the scent of stale cigarette smoke that always clung to Mom's floral couch. I remember the exact shade of taupe the walls were, the way the afternoon sun, filtered through dusty blinds, cast weak stripes across the worn rug. I was 23, perched on the edge of that couch, clutching a coffee mug that felt too heavy in my hands. My brother, Mark, sat beside her, his usual smirk playing on his lips. He'd always been her golden child, her echo. My career, as they so dismissively called it, was in tech. Not the flashy Silicon Valley kind, but the gritty, behind-the-scenes infrastructure. I was a cybersecurity analyst for a mid-sized firm that quietly kept the wheels of commerce turning. It involved long hours, complex problem-solving, and a constant hum of intellectual engagement that, to me, was deeply fulfilling. To them, however, it was a nebulous, suspect entity. It's not a profession," Mom continued, her voice a brittle scraping sound. "You don't wear a suit. You don't have a corner office. You're just on a computer all day." She punctuated this with a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand. Mark chimed in, his voice oozing mock concern. "Seriously, Sarah. People are going to think you're one of those MLM hunbots. Or worse. Are you sure you're not being scammed?" The sting of their judgment was a familiar ache. It had been a constant hum beneath the surface of our family life for years. My parents were old school. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, those were professions. Anything else, anything that deviated from the predictable path, was met with suspicion, veiled derision, and a profound lack of understanding. My choice to pursue something less tangible, something that required constant learning and adaptation, was an affront to their rigid worldview. It wasn't just about my job, it was about my perceived inability to conform, to be what they deemed successful. This particular afternoon was the crescendo. I'd been trying to explain, for the 10th time, the importance of data privacy, the ethical implications of breaches, the sheer intelligence required to stay ahead of sophisticated threats. I'd even brought printouts, schematics, a simplified breakdown of our company's impact. It was all met with blank stares, or worse, that patronizing pity that felt like a physical blow. "It's just not respectable, Sarah," Mom had said, her gaze drifting to the television. "What do you actually that's important?" The question was a dagger. It wasn't about the money, though they'd subtly hint about that too, comparing my salary, perfectly comfortable, by the way, to Mark's burgeoning law career. It was about validation. About them being able to brag to their friends about their successful daughter, not about the one who spent her days in the digital ether. This last visit was supposed to be different. I'd been promoted, entrusted with a project of significant national importance, a project that required absolute discretion. I'd tentatively mentioned it, hinting at the scale, the responsibility. Their reaction? A collective eye roll and Mark's casual suggestion that I was probably just managing someone else's spreadsheets. The final straw, however, wasn't a single event. It was the slow, deliberate erosion of my dignity, the constant undermining, the implication that my entire life's work was a childish fantasy. It was the way they'd dismiss my achievements with a shrug, while Mark's every minor court victory was a cause for a champagne toast. It was the suffocating atmosphere of judgment, the silent disapproval that hung heavier than any shouted argument. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was early Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, drizzly day that seemed to mirror my usual mood after a family interaction. I was already at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, when my phone buzzed with a notification. An email. From my father. Subject: urgent family emergency. My stomach did a familiar knot. Family emergency usually meant someone had a sniffle, or Mom had misplaced her reading glasses. But the tone of the email was different. More frantic. He explained, in his usual terse style, that Mark had gotten himself into a terrible situation. A business venture, one of his many ill-fated attempts to strike it rich quickly, had imploded. He owed a significant sum of money, an amount that was frankly astronomical, to some very unsavory characters. The threat was palpable, even through his carefully chosen words. They were demanding immediate payment, and the deadline was fast approaching. He detailed their desperation. Mark was hiding, unreachable. Mom was a wreck. They'd exhausted every avenue, personal loans, selling assets, even trying to borrow from distant relatives who, predictably, wanted nothing to do with them. And then he wrote the sentence that made my blood run cold, followed by a wave of some tea. Ing akin to grim satisfaction. Sarah, we know you have connections. We know your work involves certain people. We need you to use them. You have to get us a meeting with the CEO of Omnicorp. He's supposed to be an old friend of his father's. We think he might be able to help. You're our only hope. Omnicorp. The name echoed in my mind. It was a colossal entity, a conglomerate that spanned multiple industries, including the very tech sector I operated within. And its CEO, Elias Vance, was a legend in the business world. A notoriously private, almost mythical figure. The irony was so potent it was almost unbearable. For years, they'd dismissed my career as a joke, a scam. Now, in their deepest hour of need, they were begging me to leverage the very connections and people I'd supposedly conjured out of thin air, to approach the absolute pinnacle of the corporate world. The world that, in their eyes, I didn't belong in. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch. I reread the email, the desperate plea for help from the very people who had ostracized me. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed their condescension, their dismissal, their unwavering certainty that I was somehow less than. I thought about the quiet sacrifices I'd made to maintain some semblance of family peace, only to be met with judgment. My silence was my shield. I'd built my career on careful analysis, on anticipating threats and devising solutions. And I had learned, over years of quiet endurance, that sometimes the most powerful response was an absence of reaction. I spent the next few days in meticulous preparation. Not for a meeting, but for the inevitable fallout. I wasn't going to facilitate their panic. I wasn't going to be their savior. My own life, my own career, had been built on a foundation of principles and integrity. Principles they'd constantly belittled. I reached out to a contact. Not Elias Vance directly, but someone far, far closer to his inner circle. A man I'd met at a conference years ago, a quiet philanthropist who happened to sit on Omnicorp's advisory board. I didn't ask for a meeting with Vance. I asked for a favor, framed as a professional inquiry about Omnicorp's philanthropic initiatives. In the meantime, I let my parents' pleas escalate. Texts flooded my phone. Calls went unanswered. I saw my mother's name flash on the screen, her profile picture a smiling, slightly airbrushed version of her younger self, and I felt nothing but a cold, detached curiosity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of their mounting anxiety, I sent a single, carefully worded email. Not to my parents, but to a general Omnicorp inquiry address, and CC'd to the contact I'd cultivated. Subject: Inquiry regarding corporate social responsibility and digital literacy programs. The email was concise, professional, and entirely benign. It outlined my firm's work in promoting digital literacy and ethical technology use, and expressed a keen interest in exploring potential synergies with Omnicorp's CSR initiatives. It specifically mentioned Mr. Vance's renowned commitment to innovation and community development. I attached a brief overview of my company's impact. Then, I waited. The storm broke 2 days later. My father called, his voice a strained, reedy whisper. "Sarah, please. They're not going to wait. Mark is terrified. You have to do something. You have to get us that meeting." "What meeting, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat. A pause. A choked sob from Mom in the background. "The meeting with Mr. Vance. You know. The one you said you could get." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I don't recall promising any specific meetings, Dad. I sent an inquiry about CSR initiatives. An inquiry? Mark's voice, hoarse and frantic, cut through the line. What the hell kind of inquiry? You were supposed to help us. Mom's beside herself. I'm sorry you're in a difficult situation, I said, the words tasting like ash. But my professional engagements are just that. Professional. The rage, the desperation, the sheer disbelief in their voices was palpable. They had assumed I'd bend to their will, that my connections were simply a tool for their convenience. They had never considered that I might have boundaries, or that my professional integrity meant something. Then came the texts. From my aunt, a frantic barrage of pleading emojis and demands. From a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, asking me to do this for the family. They were the flying monkeys, dispatched to do their bidding. I blocked them all, one by one. The silence that followed on my end was deliberate, a stark contrast to the cacophony they were experiencing. The real blow landed a week later. I received an email from Omnicorp's head of communications. It was polite, formal, and utterly damning. They acknowledged my inquiry and stated that, following a review, they had identified several areas of mutual interest. Attached was a proposal for a pilot program, a collaborati, on between my firm and Omnicorp's Digital Literacy Foundation. It was a substantial project, one that would solidify my firm's reputation and my own standing within the industry. The email also included a discreet note, confirming that Mr. Vance had indeed been made aware of my inquiry and had expressed his support for exploring such a partnership. My contact on the advisory board had pulled strings, not for my family's desperate plea, but for my actual professional work. The next few days were a blur of celebratory calls from my colleagues, of genuine excitement and professional validation. I had achieved something significant, something built on merit and hard work, not on borrowed desperation. Then came the news about Mark. His business venture had officially collapsed, triggering bankruptcy proceedings. The unsavory characters had, as expected, shown no mercy. His debts were insurmountable. He was facing serious legal repercussions, the kind that could ruin a young lawyer's career before it even began. My parents were in turmoil, their carefully constructed world of appearances crumbling around them. I didn't call. I didn't offer condolences. I didn't gloat. The satisfaction wasn't in their downfall. It was in the stark, unassailable truth that my career, the one they had so readily dismissed, had not only provided me with the resilience to withstand their judgment but had also, in its own quiet way, become the instrument of their stark realization. They had banned me, ostracized me, for the perceived folly of my path. And when their own carefully manicured world fractured, it was that same path, the one they'd so scorned, that they were forced to acknowledge, to desperately seek access to beg for even a sliver of its influence. The final communication from my father came weeks later. It wasn't a plea. It was a terse, almost defiant demand. Sarah, Mark is going to be in town next week for a court appearance. We expect you to be there. We need to discuss family matters. And you need to arrange a meeting with Elias Vance. He owes us this. And you owe us. I read the email, then deleted it without reply. The silence that followed was not an absence of communication, but a profound and chilling testament to a boundary firmly, irrevocably drawn. My quiet revenge wasn't a thunderous roar, it was the deafening echo of their own forgotten words, a stark reminder that sometimes, the most profound justice is delivered not by force, but by the unyielding weight of truth.